this video, we're going to explore making selections. Now, easier said than done. Please recognize something. One of the key elements to image processing and doing refinements to images is your ability to create effective and good quality refined selections. So in view of that, what I am doing is I am going to take 4 different images because each one of them has a different tool use and behavior, and I would like to share how you can actually exploit them to make appropriate changes and how to refine your selections and how to save your selections and all of the above. So the 4 images that I have are radically different to each other in many, many ways. So my first image that you see is a sort of an architectural image with very distinct tonal values. So we'll use one kind of tool here and then see how that behaves. And then we have a far more complex image, and then we'll see how to create very specific selections in this particular image. And by the same token, a very graphic image with a lot of contrast, and we'll see how particular tools will behave and how to make selections to make changes. And then finally, the 4th image is again a bit more complex, but with fewer colors available, and we'll see how to create appropriate selections within this framework. So let's begin with the simplest of the 4 images. So if we are here, and let's say for the sake of argument, we wanted to make changes to the density of the blues in the sky. So, one of the easiest tools that you could use would be the Magic Wand tool or the Quick Selection tool. In either case, it'll work just as well. So let's try both of them. So if we took the Magic Wand tool, please pay attention that there are variables and options in the options bar at the top, where it says sample size. So we're looking at different averages. So there's a point sample, 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 11 by 11. Photographs are continuous tones. I recommend using at least an 11 by 11, or if you wish, really 5 by 5. So I'm going to start with an 11 by 11 average, and my tolerance levels are at about 12. Anti-alias is checked. Contiguous, yes. I'm not selecting from multiple layers, it's just a flat layer. Let's see how it behaves. So if I click in the blue, lo and behold, it selects it. Okay, so I'm going to deselect it by shift pushing Command D or Control D on the Mac. And if I were to change this to, let's say, a 5 by 5 average, and I change my tolerance from 12 to 5, let's see what happens. You notice that as my tolerance went down and my average sample rate went down, it did not pick up the whole thing. Doesn't really matter because you can always add to it. And there are 2 ways of adding to the selection. You could either simply press the Shift key, and if you notice, if I come in here, that's the default starting point. If I press the Shift key, there's a little plus icon that shows up next to my cursor. So I keep the Shift pressed and I can click in here, or I can go to the options bar and choose the second icon, which has 2 squares, one on top of each other, mixed with each other. That is the add, and by default, notice the icon, the tool icon, has now a plus symbol. So I could click in here and I have achieved exactly the same result. So the idea is you sort of familiarize yourselves well enough to figure out, okay, this is the tonal dynamic in here in a particular space, or the contrast dynamics, and you want to make a selection accordingly. So once I've made the selection, now let's say I just wanted to enhance the blues in here. So you could do multiple things while the selection is there. I could simply go to my adjustments in here, and I said, okay, let's use curves for a moment. So now my curves are open, and if you'll notice that the histogram shows only and only the selected space, and you will notice that the adjustment by default has added a layer mask where the black is hiding everything, while the little tiny white space shows exactly what region I'm going to influence. Let me make this a little larger so that perhaps it'll be easier to see exactly what's going on. There we go. So now in this little icon over here, the mask icon, you can see where my selection is. And if I then decide to make any changes in here, they will be reflected in just that space. You notice as I move the dark tones down, the sky becomes richer. As I move it up, it goes brighter. So I want to sort of keep the contrast going, so I want to keep it nice and rich and blue. Okay, so I've done that. In exactly that way, I am going to do further things. So I come back and I click on my background layer once again. I wish to make these to be a little cleaner in the sense of it's not really a gray, it's a white, and I want to make it superior. So if I again left my 5x5 average and tolerance to 5, let's see what happens. It didn't really quite pick it up. So what I want to do is maybe increase my tolerance to 12 yet once again and see how it behaves by using a 5x5 average. And lo and behold, it works out pretty darn well. So I am simply going to continue adding the other regions to my selection. So I have missed out in this tiny space and here, and then here, and then here, and a few other spaces. So now that I have finalized the selection, I can enlarge the image and I can actually pick on this, but I'll show you another way of cleaning it out a little later. So I've got the nice selection going, but I also want to pick on this little panel right at the top where I'm moving my cursor. So I continue by clicking, and let's see, it has selected it quite well. But this has been missed out, okay? So I am going to save the selection and then fix it and refine it. There are multiple ways of doing that. So the first more efficient way is that I simply go to my select menu at the top and I say save selection. And when it says selection, a new dialog box opens up where I can give it a name, and I'm going to say bright and hit OK. Now, as soon as I've done that, my selection is safe. Now, where is it saved? Allow me to demonstrate. So I'm going to get rid of the marching ants by simply going Command D or Control D on Windows, and I go to my layers panel, and right next to the layers panel is paths and then channels. So let's click on channels and see what it shows. So it shows me the RGB composite, the red, green, and blue separately, and then suddenly it shows me another one, which is bright. That's what I had named. If I click on it, now it shows me in absolute terms of pure white and pure black. White would be the area where I'm adding influence. Black would be the area where I am not allowing any influence of the changes that I'll be making. But now I want to clean this out, and the little bit of residual blacks that are left in here. Very simply, all we really need to do, take the brush tool and choose an appropriate size and an appropriate level of hardness. So right now my brush is pretty large, and I'm going to reduce it, and I'm going to increase the hardness reasonably, and then simply come in here and very carefully click. But make sure your opacity and flow are set to 100% before you begin, and then it will allow you to erase that region. What I'm now doing is, once I get out of this space, I am modifying the shape and form of my selection. So to be precise, I'll enlarge it, use a smaller brush, and very gently and carefully clean it out. And perhaps just a tiny bit more, and there we go. Remember, don't rush these things. Please be patient so that you can actually work it precisely. Now, when we look at that, you see how nicely the selection has been made. It has picked up on these regions as well. Let's see whether this is a part of that or not. So I activate my RGB as well to see where it is going. I think I should hide this, okay? So I'll come back in here, switch off the RGB, and bring black in the foreground in the toolbar, and then do exactly the same thing, paint black in here. And very carefully so that it's exact. So I noticed a little bit of residual black left in there, so I will clean it out. And here as well. Anything else? Just a tiny bit of stuff left in here. And then I'll flip the black to white, and the quick way to do it is hit the X key on the keyboard and it reverts back to the white. It swaps itself. And there we go. Let's make sure I haven't left anything. I missed out, so I'm going to hit X and fill this with black. And anything else? Not that I can see. So let's reduce the size. Now that I have done this, I'll simply click on the RGB and my image comes back without any damage or anything. And if I now wish to activate that selection, I simply go to my layers, make sure I'm in the appropriate layer, which is the background, and then I select, go to the menu, select at the top, and I say load selection. And as soon as I say load selection, another dialog box opens up. And here, whatever I may have made, so this is the one that I had created, brights, I'll hit OK. And guess what? The marching ants are back again. And the best part is that you can further refine this at a later point in time. So you see tiny little details that we could easily work on. So if we wanted to brighten this a little bit, I once again go here and my favorite curves, and I come to curves, and quite comfortably I can make the space brighter. And if I wanted to maintain certain levels of contrast, I can still do that to whatever degree that I want, if you notice that. And while I have the selection, I can do a whole load of other things. So that's a total non-issue. How I have used one basic tool, which was the magic wand, or I could have done the quick selection tool as well, because the behavior is very similar in many ways, to create specific selections. Now, if I wanted to work something in this sort of a dull region, and I wanted to get rid of this cast over here, the red reflecting back, for whatever reasons, it's not a big issue. Again, I'll come in here, and this time, let's see how the quick selection tool works. So as soon as I change to the quick selection tool, once again, there are different options in the menu, options menu. And again, you can choose a hardness or softness of the brush. So I'm going to soften it a little bit. And size, I'm going to enlarge the size a little because it's a fairly large space. I want to see how it behaves. So let's explore. So all you need to do is click and just keep dragging within that space. So notice how it has created the perfect selection, and I want to add more, so the plus symbol onto the brush, but this time it's a smaller space, so I will choose a smaller brush and simply extend it out. Now, there's a problem. So I have exceeded the boundaries over here. How can I change this? So I can always subtract by choosing the one with the negative symbol to it, and I simply click on the minus, and guess what? I have cleaned it up somewhat reasonably. Not the best choice, but I have cleaned it. So I realize suddenly that, hey, this is a simple straight line. Why am I worrying and using these complicated tools? I am simply going to use a different marquee selection tool to add on to the selection. So I take the polygonal lasso, make sure my feathering is once again set to very low levels, maybe around 2 pixels, and hit enter on the keyboard, and I will choose the plus add to selection. So notice the marquee tool has a plus symbol with it, and I'm simply going to start clicking and dragging it straight down to the point where I want it to be, which is right here. And then I'll simply come to the top part and double click to close the selection. Ah, silly me. I double clicked on the outside. I don't want it there. Easy enough to subtract it from the selection that I have made, because my selection has now gone on to the lighter regions. I don't want that. So how can I subtract? So you notice the third little icon, which has a sort of a hollow looking blackish square on a white. This is to take away from a selection. And if you'll notice on the cursor, now there is a minus symbol. So I come in here very carefully, placing it, and I'll go simply in a straight line all the way here, and then click and bring it to the point of origin, wherever I might have started. Now, where did I start? I don't remember. It doesn't really matter. I'll simply double click, and it by default will go back to its point of origin and close the selection. So now I have this selection. Once again, it's a smart idea if you're working in Photoshop to simply save the selection. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the select menu and say save selection. And this time I'm going to give it another name. So I'm going to call it underside roof and hit OK. And once again, I can simply get rid of the marquee by doing Command D or Control D and check it out in channels, and there we have the underside of the roof. So I have got a beautiful selection yet once again. So I don't really need to refine it. So I'm going to go back to my layers and make a change. Now this is primarily a white, and I really don't want the red to show through. So I want to sort of, it's a dirty little white. I want to clean it up and do all those lovely things. So how can I do that? I simply go to select menu once again, load my selection, and choose the underside of the roof and hit OK. And the same selection kicks in. But this time I'm going to cheat a little bit, because I want to sort of get rid of this. So I could go and eliminate all saturation in one of my adjustment layers, or reduce the saturation, which is basically come to hue saturation. And if you notice, here's the new layer, and I could simply take the saturation slider and reduce it. And notice that reddish tint has disappeared. So if this works for you, brilliant. Otherwise, there are other ways of doing it as well. So I'll undo this for a moment, and I'm gone. So that adjustment layer is gone. Allow me to move this away and make the image a little larger so you guys can see exactly what's going on. Let's plug you here, and my selection is still active. This time I'm not going to choose hue and saturation or color balance, but I want to cheat a little. I want to go to black and white. As soon as I go to black and white, everything becomes neutral, just the way that hue and saturation, when I desaturated, everything became okay. But the difference is there may be other tones in here which I can perhaps exploit to brighten or to modify the contrast dynamics in here. So there's yellow. So when I move the yellow slider, because the black and white layer is working as a luminosity layer by default, and the reds, so I can really sort of work it to a great benefit to myself to allow me to do that. But there's more to it. Let's say I can only go so far, and whatever it is that I'm doing, can I make any other changes to it? Absolutely yes. I can do another either levels or curves layer to add a little more contrast and punch to it and make it into what is known as a clipping layer so that it's associated with this particular layer of black and white. Let's see what it is like. So I go into my adjustments, I choose curves, and if you notice, in the curves panel, there's this little icon with an arrow pointing downwards. What happens, and pay attention to what happens to this particular layer, the adjustment layer with curves. When I click on it, it shifts itself to the right, which implies that this is now only and only going to influence the layer directly beneath, and since that's the only white region, that's where the influence will be. And just to demonstrate, not necessarily to do it, I will show you. So I'm moving the curve over, and I want to give it a little more contrast. So I can fool around and do exactly what I want and how I want to play with this whole space. I hope this sort of helps you better understand how I am using the selection tool, only a certain kind, to create specific types of selections. So this is kind of the most basic approach of using some of the selection tools. Now there are far more sophisticated tools which will allow you to do many other things in a far more refined manner. And for example, if you decide, hey, this is not the image, this is too easy an image and I wish to work on some other image, so let's take this image for example. In this case, I just wish to select the yellows and the oranges in here. So if I were to use any of the tools that I've currently used in my earlier demonstration, this would drive me a little mad because it'll be very challenging to sit and invest a lot of time one at a time and see how far can I select. So the next really wonderful tool that exists in the world of Photoshop is the following. So you can always sort of, go to hue saturation and say, hey, this is the only thing that I want. So let's see what happens. So this obviously looks like a yellow orange, or I could take the interactive tool and click on one tone and say, okay, this is what I wish to saturate. But watch what happens, because a photograph may have the same color in many other spaces. So the moment I click in here, Photoshop's hue saturation recognizes that, hey, I'm looking for the yellows. So notice the yellows has become active. So I come back in here and still yellows, and I can start moving the slider. But as I move the slider, it's influencing a whole lot of other things as well. And I really don't have granular control over the behavior of that particular space. So perhaps this is not the best tool. So I simply double click and it reverts to 0, or I can come in here and I can trash this adjustment. So my image goes back to its original state. My personal choice would have been that I would go into my select menu at the top and I say, hey, let's look at the color range. When I click on it, another dialog box opens up and the image starts to look a little funky over here. So how the image appears is a choice that you can make. So in this particular window, there's a drop-down menu which says selection preview as a black matte, as a grayscale, or as a white matte, or as a quick mask. Take your pick. It's a choice that you make. Okay? So I personally kind of like a grayscale because it shows me distinct tonal values, or even a white matte. Whatever works for you, you choose, or you can simply say none. So there will be no influence on the image, but only in the preview window, which is kind of small and hard to work with. Okay. So you could easily say, okay, let's leave it to a grayscale, and over here in the preview, just show me the image. So you have choices to work with. That's one. Then you have this by default, another drop down menu. And if you click in here, it has reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magenta, highlights, midtones, shadows, skin tones, and outer gamut. Let's see how this works. So if I said, oh, obvious yellows. So if I click on yellows, you will notice that it has picked up on the yellows, but in a similar manner, things that you see with the dark gray is also being picked up, just the way when I did hue saturation, it influenced other regions of this image as well. Let's try reds for a moment. Not really, doesn't cut it. Or if we thought that these are sort of highlights, let's see what happens. It does pick up cleanly some of the regions. Now, suddenly as I chose the highlights, their additional slider shows up, which is the range. And then there's this fuzziness. So the lower the percentile value, the less of a selection you will have. So when I go down, you notice it becomes less and less. And as I increase the fuzziness, my selection expands itself. So you could potentially use this to create a selection by using the fuzziness slider and the range slider. So I said, okay, I don't want all that. So I can again go towards the additional tones in there. And then I'll have to sit and clean all the other things out, which is okay, because again, this is an exercise in patience. So this is another way. And then finally, there's this option of sampled colors. Let's see what happens when I say sample colors. So as soon as I choose sample colors, I then have option of something called localized color clusters. So I want to check that. And suddenly the range also appears and the fuzziness is there, and I can choose the sliders positioning. But first I have to make a choice of what region am I looking for. So I generally just, in this little preview window, click on a particular yellow tone, which then gives me some idea of what's going on. So I click on the yellow here, and if you notice, I am picking up just the yellows as yet. But what happens if I modify the range? It goes up a little bit, and then the fuzziness is modified, and other things are happening. But then I can't really pick over here because I can't really see the image. So perhaps now I will change it to none so that I can see the original image, and as opposed to this being the image, I'll say show me the selection here. So again, there's the add or subtract option over here. So I click on the add option, and I will simply go clicking on other regions, and I'll continue clicking on other regions to make sure that I am getting the right choice. So you'll notice that as I'm clicking around, my selection is getting better and better. You can also click and drag in a particular space, but then if it sees other elements underneath it, it may pick on other spaces. So which is exactly what it did. It picked up on some of the tree trunks in the back, did an undo, Command Z or Control Z. So if this is kind of there, you're never going to get a perfect selection in here. If you're kind of there, it's important to recognize that you will need to do a little more work at it. So if I said OK, so you'll notice that the marching ants have not quite gone all the way around, and there are other elements in here which need to be cleaned up. How do we fix that? Oh, this is the easier part, relatively speaking. So now that I have this, the first thing I wish to do is hit the menu, select, and say Save Selection. And I'm going to give it just the yellow leaves and hit OK. Now that I have that, I can deselect it completely. Once again, going into my channels and clicking on the yellow leaves, now you can see exactly where your selections are. I really want to clean out the blacks because wherever there is a black or a apparent gray, it's not going to have a complete and absolute change that I wish to make. So I want to clean that selection. And I also wish to get rid of this tree trunk and all those things that I really don't care much about. So if it's a broad selection where there's nothing else to be influenced, it's not a bad idea to simply take the brush, whatever size you may be working with, and so I'm going to enlarge it a wee bit. How hard or soft you may wish to keep it, make sure set to normal. Opacity is at 100%, so is the flow. And if it's the white that I'm cleaning up, then I'll make sure that the white is in the foreground. If I am closing down all these areas which I don't really want, then I want the black. And to give you an idea how it behaves, so I've enlarged my cursor and I simply come and I want to hide this selection. So remember, this was all sort of selected and there were marching ants, and once again you really don't want to go too close to the areas that you don't want to change, so you stay away from the stuff that you can damage. So I'm simply filling up these regions with black. So just cleaning it out and just broad strokes. I don't want to get fancy and precise at this stage. So all I'm really doing is cleaning it out. So, and I want to show you once I've done this, what change I have made. So just bear with me for a moment and I will share with you. I gotta see the other parts of the image as well. So I need to clean this up, get rid of this, get rid of this. Some of the nonsense that's happening here, some things here, a little bit in here. I may reduce the brush size just so that I don't go over my leaves. So let's say I've done this much. Let's get out of here and just for a moment load the selection to see how the selection is. So when I load the selection yellow leaves, you will notice that now none of the tree aspects are selected, but I still need to clean out all these inner marching ants and just have a nice clean outline to the leaves per se. Okay, so I'm going to undo this, just deselect it and go back to my channels and select on this. So now I wish to clean the yellows and further close down any residual things that are left. So I see a tree trunk here as well. So I will quickly use a solid black and modify the brush size. And as a reminder, you can change the brush size by using the square bracket. Square bracket to the right will enlarge the brush size. Square bracket to the left will reduce the brush size. Okay, so I'm just doing all of this on an enlarged scale so that I don't make a mistake. I don't want any of this, and I want to make sure that I don't mess up, and I really want to be very, very precise. Now, let's say we have kind of achieved the basic fixing where my blacks are reasonably okay and I really don't have too much of residual stuff left. And now I want to start refining everything so that it's a nice, clean, smooth mask that I can work with. So let's begin with something small, just to share how the behavior may be. So I am still in black. I'll flip it over to the white. Okay, so I can click on the arrow or hit the X key and it'll swap. Whichever color is in the foreground is the active color. So now I have white. What I want to do is I want to go to the options menu at the top, and notice where my cursor is, it says normal. Click on the drop down and choose overlay. And once I have chosen overlay, I'm going to leave my flow and opacity to 100%. I want to clean this out. And you will notice, and just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to enlarge my brush. So what I'm doing is I'm letting it go over the black as well as the white. And I click and I move it around. So you'll notice that it is not really having much of an influence. Now it did, but that's okay. We can always fix it. So I was being a bit silly by using a large brush. So I've reduced the brush, and you may have to go over it more than once to get rid of everything. So here I have cleaned it. And what I want to do is now swap it to black in the foreground because I had spilled over. So I come back and I am now fixing that. And little things that were visible are also going to disappear. So just to show what the difference is, let me get out of here and load this selection for a moment so that you can see. And yellow, okay. So you notice how nicely this has been selected, while this leaf still has a lot of the marching ants showing up in there. So we do want to get rid of those as well. So I'm going to deselect, go back in here, and you can see the behavior. I flip to white in the foreground, and I simply come and paint over it. And if you need to, there's no harm in changing the blend mode from overlay to normal if it's a solid black that you wish to paint on, or a solid white that you wish to paint on. And it's always a good idea to flip it and then paint once again with the black so that you can clean the edges out, and anything that you might have overdone, it will correct itself. So you notice how nicely this has been done. I will clean this out as well. And I flipped it to the white, and I'm going to clean it. So if you're wondering, I'm just doing one leaf at a time. Sure, it does take time, which is okay. So I'm going to enlarge my brush and paint away. And just for the sake of expediency, I'm going to enlarge my brush quite substantially, just so that you know exactly what will happen if you did that. And then flip it over to black and go over the same things again, because what I'm doing is I'm also closing up all the black regions at the same time that I am refining my selection in many ways. So I'm constantly flipping between the black and white just to ensure that everything works out well. So things that started to show up, I'm simply going to paint back. Now, lo and behold, we have a decent selection. So there might be some things left over which you can always clean out later on. So assuming that we've done this correctly and cleanly, I go to select and I hit my load selection, and we're going to further refine it. And I hit OK. And I realize that, darn it, there's still stuff in here. Okay? How do we go about resolving this? What happens if I go to the menu which says select, and I go to modify? And what can I do? Can I feather it? Can I contract it? Can I expand it, smooth it, or make a border? So for now, let's consider feathering. And how much feathering are we really talking about? Because I want soft edges around my selections. So if I were to do 2 to 3 pixels, let's see what happens with 3 pixels, okay? And as soon as I do that, nicely done. So majority of the marching ants from over the leaves has disappeared. Some have not. And one can always save this and go back and clean it. Or another option that you have is enter the quick mask. So the quick mask is available to you in the toolbar. You notice this little rectangle with a dotted circle. If you click on this, this is the quick mask, which shows you exactly what your selections are. In my case, there are some places that could be cleaned up. Okay, so once again, white will paint away, while black will add the red, and I'm in the overlay mode, which is fine because it will still continue to behave in exactly the same way as it was behaving when I had a black mask. So I can always change it to the normal blend mode and clean it out. Get out of the quick mask and you can see the changes that have been made in here. So assuming for a moment that we are happy with the selection that we have made, I am simply going to go and resave this again, and I'm going to call it yellow leaves 1 and hit OK. So I haven't lost the original selection. So just to share, this was the original, this is the modified. Okay, so you can see the differences, how much better or cleaner it may be. So now that I know it's done, I simply go into select and I say load selection, and I have a choice of which one do I want. Do I want the yellow leaves 1 or the yellow leaves? So 1 was the latter one. I take it, and then at this point in time, it's your call which adjustment you may wish to utilize. So remember, I was using the hue saturation earlier on. So I could simply go back to the hue saturation layer, and this time again I could take the interactive tool or just simply take the master and saturate it or desaturate it. It's a choice you make, again, because there's nothing else that is going to be impacted, because now I have a mask, and wherever it is white is where the impact will be. So I have effectively made specific changes. So you notice that's the change that I've made. Now, how to use the selection effectively yet once again. So this time I want to go and influence the rest of the elements, but not the leaves. So the smart thing is I already have the leaves available to me, selected, and I've made the changes. So I can simply go back to load selection and I say, hey, leaves 1, but this time I'm going to check the invert box. So it will actually make a selection inversely. It will select everything other than the leaves. If you notice now, there's the marching ants all around it. And once again, you can make whatever adjustment you want to this particular selection the way you want it. So let's say I will go back into my, let's say, what do I want? I'll go with my curves for a moment. And I wish to darken it a little bit and play with it. And I also wish to modify my blues a little bit. So I want to change the blues or add the blues. I actually wanted to reduce it a tiny bit, give it a little bit of warmth. And suddenly, if you notice here in the layer mask, white is the majority. The leaves have not been influenced, and suddenly I have made radical changes. in literally 2 steps. So this is another approach towards creating selections. Let's stop here so that you can review it, and then in the next video we will talk about the other selection tools that are available and how we can utilize them. Thank you very much for watching.